Chloe Weston, a 30-year-old mountain researcher, arrived at the remote town of Elders Peak, nestled deep in the shadow of the towering Graymoor Mountain. The town was as isolated as it was beautiful, untouched by the hustle of the modern world, with its narrow cobblestone streets, faded wooden signs, and air of mystery that hung like mist over its buildings. Chloe's reason for coming here was simple: science. She had been hired by a geological research agency to study the unique rock formations in the region. Graymoor Mountain had a storied history, shaped by millennia of natural forces, and Chloe was eager to explore the ancient landslides and rocky peaks that held valuable clues to the Earth's past. The assignment was set for 7 days, enough time to gather the data she needed and immerse herself in her passion. Upon arriving, Chloe rented a small, cozy house on the outskirts of Elders Peak. It was quiet, just as she liked, perfect for unwinding after a long day of research in the wilderness. The town seemed frozen in time with its quaint, untouched charm. She felt like she had stepped back into another era, where life moved slowly and secrets were buried deep within the silence. Her first few days were spent diving into her work, mapping rock formations, documenting changes in the landscape, and trekking to remote areas of Graymoor to collect samples. It was physically demanding, but mentally exhilarating. Every crack in the rock told a story, and Chloe was determined to uncover as many of them as possible. It didn't take long, however, for her to notice her neighbor. Dellin lived in the house next door, and though the two exchanged only brief glances in the beginning, Chloe couldn't help but be intrigued. He was a rugged man, likely in his late 30s. She often saw him working outside, chopping wood, tending to his garden, or tinkering with his old car. He seemed to prefer his own company, much like Chloe, though there was something about his silence that held a quiet intensity. As the days passed, they exchanged pleasantries, nods of acknowledgement, polite smiles, the occasional wave from across the yard. Chloe thought nothing of it at first. She wasn't looking for anything more than a quiet, productive week. But on the third evening, after returning from a particularly long day of climbing steep trails and collecting geological samples, Chloe faced a problem: her car wouldn't start. Frustration bubbled up as she tried again and again to turn the ignition, but the engine only groaned in response. It was already late, and she still had data to log before nightfall. Stepping out of her car, she noticed Dellin standing near his own vehicle, wiping his hands on a rag after what seemed to be another round of repairs. Chloe, normally independent to a fault, hesitated before walking over. "Dellin, hey, do you have a minute?" she called out, her voice carrying over the still evening air. He looked up, surprised, but walked over without hesitation. "Looks like something with the engine. I can't fix it right now, but I can give you a lift if you need." Chloe hesitated, but she was already running behind schedule. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Dellin replied, flashing a rare smile. The drive was surprisingly pleasant. The conversation flowed easily between them, much to Chloe's surprise. They talked about the town's history, the mountain's quirks, and their work. Dellin seemed to know a lot about Elders Peak, its secrets and its solitude. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, it was with a quiet confidence that made Chloe feel at ease. Over the next few days, their encounters became more frequent. Each morning, Chloe would prepare for another day in the mountains, and Dellin would wave to her from his porch or greet her with a casual morning as he worked on his car or tended to his yard. Small talk turned into longer conversations. One morning, they shared coffee, talking about life outside of Elders Peak. Chloe told him about her work, her love for the mountains, and the sense of purpose she felt in uncovering the Earth's ancient past. Dellin listened more than he spoke, but there was something in his gaze, a quiet understanding, that made her feel as though he saw more than he let on. By the 6th day, Chloe found herself thinking about Dellin more often than she expected. There was a connection between them, subtle but undeniable. It came as no surprise, then, when Dellin invited her to dinner at the town's only restaurant that evening. The restaurant was small and rustic, with dim lighting and a cozy atmosphere that felt almost out of place in the otherwise quiet, somber town. Chloe arrived a few minutes late, but Dellin was already waiting for her at a table by the window. His smile when he saw her was warm, almost disarming. They shared a meal that felt more like a celebration than just dinner. Conversation flowed easily, and Chloe found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. She felt a connection with Dellin that was both comforting and exciting, as if they had known each other far longer than just a few days. After dinner, Dellin suggested they take a drive. "There's an old mill just outside town," he said. "It's abandoned now, but no one ever goes there. It's quiet, and you can see the stars like nowhere else." Chloe, feeling adventurous, agreed. They drove in silence for a while, the car winding through the dark, twisting roads that led out of town. The stars above them were brilliant, but as they approached the mill, Chloe felt a strange unease settle over her. The mill was an eerie place, its crumbling structure a silhouette against the starry sky. The building loomed in the darkness, forgotten and foreboding. Dellin parked the car and stepped out, and Chloe followed, though a sense of foreboding had begun to creep up her spine. As they stood in the stillness, something didn't feel right. Chloe's head began to swim, her vision blurring. A wave of dizziness overtook her, and she stumbled, reaching out for balance. "Are you okay?" Dellin asked, his voice distant now, almost detached. Before she could respond, her legs gave out beneath her. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was Dellin's face, his smile twisted, his eyes cold and gleaming in the pale moonlight. A month passed before the horror of what happened to Chloe Weston came to light. A local teenager, skipping class and looking for a place to hide from prying eyes, wandered into the old mill. What he found was far worse than he ever could have imagined. Chloe's body was decayed, her clothes torn, and the signs of violence clear. Terrified, the boy ran, alerting the authorities as fast as he could. Detective Joseph Quinn was called in to lead the investigation. A seasoned professional, he had dealt with gruesome cases before, but this one felt different. The brutality of the crime, the remote location, it all pointed to something darker than a simple crime of passion. The town of Elders Peak was rocked by the discovery. People whispered in fear, locking their doors at night, afraid that whatever had happened to Chloe could happen again. Joseph began his investigation by interviewing everyone in the town, starting with those who had known Chloe in her short time there. Dellin's name came up repeatedly, but when Joseph first spoke to him, he seemed calm, even helpful. Still, Joseph couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dellin was too composed, too smooth in his answers. He said he hadn't seen Chloe after their dinner the night she disappeared, but Joseph's gut told him that Dellin knew more than he was letting on. Days of investigation led Joseph to a breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Dellin's car driving toward the mill the night Chloe was last seen. It was the evidence Joseph needed. He went to confront Dellin, but the moment he knocked on the door, Dellin fled, bolting through the back door and into the woods. The chase was brief. Dellin, cornered, had nowhere to go. Joseph drew his gun, leveling it at the man who had hidden behind a mask of normalcy. "It's over," Joseph said, his voice cold. Dellin was arrested, and under pressure, he confessed not only to Chloe's murder but to the rape and killing of 4 other women across different towns. Each time he had used the same method, charming his victims before revealing the monster within. Elders Peak was left to grapple with the horror they had unknowingly harbored. Dellin was sentenced to life in prison, but for Chloe's family and the others, the wounds would never truly heal. If you have any crime story happens to you or your friends, then leave a comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe.